is a potential solution. There have been all sorts of ideas floating around. Some people even suggest that Libya is a sort of empty country, and so it can be filled up with migrants, and they've got lots of oil wealth and that needs development. I mean, that's been sort of thrown out a little bit. But, you know, there seems to be a desperation in Europe to just sort of stop this at the border and not necessarily deal with it. And as people have suggested, this is not a recent thing either.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the problem with this is that that European countries that are concerned with smuggling coming from migrants coming from Libya have focused on sort of just a preventative approach and have done what they have seen as necessary in terms of piecemeal efforts to stop the flow of migrants coming to their country. And it's a very nationally focused approach, focused on their national interests. And I think that for the past 6 years, we've seen the international community approach Libya in this way, in terms of different countries pursuing their own national interests rather than thinking about the long term in Libya. How do we get to long-term stability? And this fact of sort of just addressing small national interests separately from one another is what helped lead to the spread of ISIS in Libya. The lack of stability in Libya is a root cause of ISIS in Libya. ISIS is not the cause of the stability. So I think what needs to happen is for the international community to come together and help put pressure on the different parties in Libya, come together in support of a comprehensive UN plan, and really let the UN take the lead on this. The more that we see countries trying to deal with problems in Libya on their own, such as European countries focusing solely on migration issues, we're not going to see any progress in Libya in terms of moving towards stability.
Thank you. And when you put that cork in the bottle, if you like, you get this head of steam. And we're seeing some migrants not be able to get across. The smugglers need to make money. And we've seen slavery basically return according to... I'm going to play you something from CNN over the last couple of days because it's quite incredible. Let's just take a look.
يعني بقدر هو مستمر المزاد؟
لا خلاص
هو كان كم نفر؟
12 نفر.
So that's 12 people apparently being auctioned off on CNN. Sukant, you brought up the slavery issue earlier. This is quite incredible that migrants wanting to get across can't be, and the people that want to make money off them end up selling them for work, essentially.
Absolutely. I think I really balk at this equation between the Jamahiriya period of the migration issues and post what happened after the NATO war of destruction.
Sure.
There's no comparison whatsoever. There was a problem of racism in Libyan society. There always has been. But as I said, the first defining actions of NATO's rebels or revolutionaries or whatever Mr. Gamaty wants to call them was the open lynching, was going into public squares and literally chopping up black people and stringing them up. In addition to that, another defining part of 2011 and the war was NATO and its proxies ethnic cleansing the only black African town in all of North Africa, which was called Tawarga, which is close to Misrata in northern Libya. That town is no longer, the residents have been expelled, raped, killed out of it, and they've been dispersed everywhere. There is a struggle in Libya of black people, of black Libyans and other Africans and other migrants. There's a struggle, and they are in a resistance with exactly those factions that support the Jamahiriya for 41 years and want to return to unity, nationalization, socialism, using the wealth for all its people. So it's there, and people should engage with that. So it's no surprise that the defining actions of NATO's proxies were these depraved racist acts. And you know, my Libyan friends laugh. They say, Sukant, you know, the NATO countries and their media talk about the Libyan Navy and their allies in the daytime. He said, in the nighttime, they become the people traffickers. They became the enslavers of black people and migrants. Okay. This is the rank hypocrisy and the scandal which is open in front of everyone to see if only people talk about it and engage with the reality and the facts on the ground.
Sukant brings up a point, Guma, that I'd like to make. That what about the average Libyan now, 6 years on? You know, there's all this peace process going on way above them. It doesn't seem to be working. Were they better off under Gaddafi?
It is ludicrous to suggest that Libya, because it has a small population and it's very rich, it should settle millions of sub-Saharan migrants who are wanting to get to Europe because they think Europe is the promised land. Libya is not the cause of the problem, it's not the source of problem, it's merely a transit route from sub-Saharan Africans, for sub-Saharan Africans, because it's the nearest to Italy, and Lampedusa is only 300 kilometers away. And by the way, Nathan, when you suggest that, why don't these migrants be settled in Norway, which is only 5 million as well, less even than the Libyan population, and Norway is highly rich and prosperous. If these migrants have the right to claim asylum, whether it's a human or economic or whatever asylum in Europe, then they should, the international law should be applied. It should not be dumped on Libya. That is very, very unfair, and it's very selfish of Europe. Now I come to your question. Of course, the Libyans are not better, are not worse off than the Gaddafi era, because during the Gaddafi era for 42 years they had no freedom, no expression of opinion, no free press, no free civil society. They could not criticize, they could not form political parties, they could not form civil society organizations. Now, yes, we have chaos, we have violence, we have problem, but we are free. And the Libyans now have the opportunity to engage in all these the aspects of a democratic discourse and build a proper country based on state institutions, on a constitution, on a social contract, and on rule of law, and on pluralism, and the right of every citizen to participate in politics, in economy, in culture, and in all different types of participations which were denied to them during the Gaddafi regime.
Okay, John Louis, I was actually in Benghazi in 2011. I've made contact with a few people recently. Some of them do actually say that things were better under Gaddafi because they had security. Is that something that you hear a lot still?
I definitely hear that a lot. Objectively, the situation now in Libya is horrendous, and it's unfair to compare nowadays Libya to Libya under Gaddafi in 2007. It's not a fair comparison. Libya does need to move forward. Libyans did aspire to have a better governance system, more fair, more inclusive, more participatory, and their aspirations are not yet fulfilled. But no transition in the world is always necessarily smooth. Nation states took centuries to form. Libya will have a difficult path. It will have to walk its path. But Libya would have walked that path no matter what, no matter if there was an intervention or not. Libya was bound to fulfill its aspirations. So it's unfair to look at the current situation and say we should, Gaddafi should have stayed, or and it's out of the question anyways. What I think is more appropriate is to try and think what the solutions are, understand the mistakes, try not to reproduce them, and try to move forward. The situation is very complicated. Libya, unlike many countries, is facing 3 challenges at the same time. It's building state institutions, because it didn't have state institutions before, and Guma El-Gamaty said that very correctly. It's also building a free market, a market economy. Libya did not have a free market economy. It largely relies on its oil resources, and there is very little economic enterprise that is private. And lastly, it's trying to equip itself with democratic institutions. There is no history of civic culture in Libya, which is true. This is built. Democracy is like a bicycle. We need to start biking and learn by doing. So these 3 challenges are distinct challenges that Libya is facing at the same time. No other country during the Arab Spring was facing the same amount of challenges at the same time.
Elissa, I'm going to give you the final word. We've seen rounds and rounds of UN talks. It hasn't seemed to bring the country back together again. It's still driven by violence. We've got the problems of migration, potential terrorism as well. Does the international community keep on doing the same thing over and over again?
So I think the difference right now with the new UN plan under Hassan Salameh, the new envoy, is to bring in a national dialogue, national reconciliation aspect into Libya before elections occur. So in 2012, one of the big criticisms was that Libya went to elections too quickly. After the revolution in 2011, there was no system for national reconciliation, and this is a process that needs to include, as my colleagues have said, it needs to include multiple actors within Libya. It needs to include former supporters of Gaddafi, it needs to include the opposition, it needs to include individuals that felt that they were marginalized, and so this will be a huge mammoth task that Hassan Salameh has to accomplish, and it's very unclear whether he will be able to do so, because even right now in his initial first first steps with this process. It's hit some snags in terms of finding agreement between the HOR and the High State Council in Libya. But I think if we can get international support behind this plan, we may see something different.
Elissa Miller, thanks for wrapping it up for us. Not necessarily that optimistic going forward. Thanks, Elissa from Boston, all our guests as well, London, Rome, and London as well. Thanks so much. A very vigorous discussion. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Nathan King in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching.